I love my son so much, and I must marry him. Yes, I said so. Before I continue, please click the subscribe button. I never realized how quiet a house could be until the day after my husband's funeral. The silence didn't just sit in the corners. It breathed. It filled the air, pressing against the walls, wrapping itself around every sound I tried to make. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to tick softer, as if it too were mourning. I stood by the kitchen window that morning, still in my black dress, the one with the high collar that made me feel like I was being strangled. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. Outside, the lawn glistened with dew, the same patch of green my husband had mowed every Sunday morning without fail. I could almost see him there, shirtless, the faint line of sweat tracing his back as he pushed the mower back and forth. I blinked, and he was gone again. That word had never felt so permanent. Ethan, our son, was upstairs, still asleep. 22 years old, home from college, and suddenly the man of the house. But he wasn't a man to me. Not yet. He was still the boy who refused to go to sleep without his favorite blanket, still the child who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "Mom, make the thunder stop." He was all I had left. And God help me, I wasn't going to lose him too. When people say grief comes in waves, they never tell you that sometimes it comes in echoes. In the clink of a coffee cup, in the scent of shaving cream that lingers in the bathroom, in the faint creak of the stairs that shouldn't creak anymore. That first week after the funeral, I moved like a ghost through the house. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, rearranged furniture for no reason, opened and closed closets just to smell my husband's clothes. The housekeeper offered to stay longer hours, but I told her to go. Ethan needed peace, I said. But the truth was, I wanted him to myself. Every night, he'd sit across from me at the dinner table. The same table we'd eaten around as a family for 2 decades. There were only 2 plates now. The empty space between us where his father's chair used to be felt unbearable. Sometimes Ethan would talk about school, about how he was thinking of going back after Christmas to finish his degree. And every time he mentioned going back, something inside me clenched tight. Leaving. Always that word. Always that threat. "You don't have to rush back," I told him one evening, my fork untouched on the plate. "You could take the semester off. Stay here. Help me get things in order." He smiled the way he used to when he humored me. "Mom, I'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'll call every day." But I didn't want calls. I wanted footsteps. I wanted his presence in the house. The sound of the shower running in the morning, the thud of his shoes by the door, the murmur of his voice drifting from his room. I wanted him near enough to touch, to know that if I reached out, he'd still be there. The first photo I took down was our wedding picture. I thought it would help. Didn't. I sat on the floor of the living room, the frame in my lap, tracing the edge of my husband's smile with my finger. We looked so young then, 28 and 25, full of plans and certainty. I had wanted 4 children, a noisy house, laughter spilling into the hallway. But life, as it often does, had other ideas. After Ethan, the doctors said it was too risky to try again. So I poured everything I had into him. Every dream, every ounce of love I couldn't give another child, I gave to my son. He was my second chance. My reason. My everything. When my husband and I fought, and we did, sometimes bitterly, it was always Ethan who broke the silence afterward. He'd bring me flowers from the yard or slip notes under my door. "Don't cry, Mom. Dad didn't mean it." But now it was just me. And Ethan. No one left to smooth things over. No one to stand between what I felt and what I might become. One night I couldn't sleep. I went to Ethan's room. The door was slightly ajar, and the dim glow of his bedside lamp spilled into the hall. He was asleep, sprawled across the bed the way he used to as a boy, one arm over his face, the blanket tangled around his legs. For a moment I just stood there, watching his chest rise and fall, the gentle rhythm of it easing something raw inside me. He looked so peaceful, so untouched by the storm that had swallowed me whole. Quietly, I walked in, pulled the blanket up to his shoulders, and brushed the hair from his forehead. He stirred a little, murmuring something but didn't wake. Good night, my darling boy, I whispered. Don't leave me too. I don't know why I cried then. Maybe because, in that moment, I realized he was all that tethered me to this world. And if I lost that, I would lose myself. The following morning, he came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mom, were you in my room last night? My heart skipped. Why would you think that? I shrugged. I thought I heard something. Guess I was dreaming. He smiled, poured himself coffee, and kissed the top of my head. That small, familiar gesture, one he'd done since he was a teenager, made my throat tighten. Your father used to do that, I said softly. I know. He looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing for the first time how much of me had disappeared into widowhood. You're not eating. You should eat more. I'm fine, I said automatically. But I wasn't fine. The food turned to ash in my mouth, and my body felt too heavy for its bones. Still I smiled for him. Because if I didn't, he might see the truth, that I wasn't grieving anymore. I was consuming my grief, nursing it like an addiction, feeding it with every thought of him. A week later, we went through my husband's belongings. Ethan had insisted. It'll help, Mom, he said. You shouldn't hold on to everything. I sat beside him on the floor of the study, surrounded by old shirts, ties, cufflinks, and books that still smelled like his cologne. Ethan worked methodically, stacking things into boxes, humming quietly under his breath. When he picked up one of his father's watches, I saw his reflection in the glass cabinet behind him. The same broad shoulders, the same serious mouth. For a fleeting second, I could have sworn it was my husband sitting there. My breath caught. Mom! I blinked. The vision broke. It was only Ethan, looking at me with that patient concern he'd inherited from his father. I'm sorry, I said. You look so much like him sometimes. He smiled faintly. I get that a lot. I wanted to tell him that sometimes it was more than a resemblance, that sometimes I looked at him and felt like the years had folded in on themselves, and the man I married was back in my house, sitting across from me, alive again in our son's skin. But I didn't say it. Some thoughts are too dangerous to speak aloud. As the days passed, people stopped visiting. The casseroles stopped coming. The phone calls slowed. And the house became ours again. Quiet, secluded, safe. I started cooking again, always his favorite meals. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. I'd set the table for two, light a candle, and insist we eat together. It was our routine now, our new rhythm. But every so often, he'd check his phone during dinner. A quick text, a faint smile. Then he'd slip it back into his pocket. Who's that? I asked casually one evening. Just someone from school. A girl. He hesitated. That pause told me everything I needed to know. Her name was Lena. I smiled like it didn't matter, but that night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that name in my head like a curse. Lena. The first woman to threaten what little I had left. It's strange how jealousy creeps in, quiet as a shadow. You don't notice it at first. Just a faint unease, a flicker of irritation. But then it grows. It feeds on your thoughts, on your fears, until it becomes something you can't control. When Ethan mentioned her again, I tried to act interested. She's just a friend, he said. We had a few classes together. But I heard the change in his tone, the softness, the way he lingered on her name. Does she know about me? Yes. He laughed lightly. Of course. She knows you're still grieving. She thinks I should stay longer to help you. She's very kind then, I said, my voice tight. She is. That night, I opened a bottle of wine. Just one glass turned into two, then three. The walls seemed to breathe again, mocking me with their silence. I walked into his room and sat on the edge of his bed. The faint scent of his shampoo, the scattered clothes, the open textbooks, it all felt sacred somehow. I pressed my hand to his pillow and closed my eyes. If I could, I would freeze time here in this house with him. No Lena. No college. No leaving. Just us. The next morning, he found me asleep in the living room, still in yesterday's clothes. He didn't ask why. He just made coffee, handed me a cup and said, "You should take better care of yourself, Mom." I smiled, but something inside me whispered the truth I didn't want to admit. I wasn't taking care of myself anymore. I was taking care of us. And I'd do anything to keep it that way. It's strange how quickly a house adjusts to new rhythms. After the funeral, after the visitors stopped coming, after the silence settled and made itself at home, it was just the two of us, me and Ethan. Two ghosts pretending to be alive. He decided not to go back to college that winter. "Just one semester," he said, "to make sure you're okay." I smiled, trying to hide the rush of relief that swept through me like warm water. Of course I protested. Said things like, "You shouldn't put your life on hold for me and I'll be fine," but deep down I was secretly thankful. I needed him. The house needed him. And so began the months of our quiet life together. The house of two. Mornings were the best. He'd come downstairs barefoot, hair tousled, wearing one of his old t-shirts that clung to the shape of his shoulders. He'd make pancakes while I brewed coffee, the scent of maple syrup filling the kitchen like memory. We talked about everything and nothing, about the weather, the broken fence, his plans for the future. I'd nod along, pretending to listen, though I barely heard a word. All I could think was, he's here. He stayed. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at him too long. The angle of his jaw. The curve of his smile. How his voice had deepened into a man's but still carried the softness of the boy I raised. He reminded me of his father more and more each day. But unlike his father, Ethan didn't argue. He didn't shut me out. He was gentle, patient, almost too patient. And the more time we spent together, the more I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, we could live like this forever. One afternoon I found him outside fixing the back porch steps. The air smelled like pine and sawdust. The sound of his hammer echoed across the yard, steady and sure. I watched from the kitchen window, the sunlight catching on his skin. For a moment, I imagined the years reversing, the wrinkles smoothing, the gray fading from my hair, the clock winding backward until I was young again. Young enough to start over. Young enough to be the woman standing beside him. Not his mother, not a widow, but someone alive and full of possibility. The thought frightened me. I dropped the dish I was holding, and it shattered across the sink. Ethan ran in immediately. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said too quickly. "Just clumsy." He frowned. "You're shaking." I looked down. My hands trembled as if I'd been caught doing something wrong. He took them in his, large and warm, the way his father used to when I was upset. "Mom," he said softly, "you have to take care of yourself." "I am," I whispered. "As long as you're here, I am." He smiled, unaware of how much I meant it. The days blurred together. Morning coffee, afternoon walks, dinner at 6. He read books in the living room while I knitted or pretended to. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on the couch, and I'd drape a blanket over him, standing there longer than I should, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. But there were moments when he seemed distant, his gaze wandering to his phone, his mind somewhere else. "Who are you texting?" asked one evening. He hesitated. "Just Lena. She's asking about my plans." The name stung, though I tried not to show it. "Oh, that's nice," I said. "She's thoughtful." "Yeah. She wants to visit next weekend." The air between us tightened. I could feel it pressing against my ribs. "Visit," I repeated. "Here." He nodded, smiling like it was nothing. "I told her she could stop by. Just for the weekend." I gripped my wine glass too tightly. "You think that's a good idea? I mean, it's only been 2 months since your father passed." "I know, Mom. But life has to go on." That phrase, "life has to go on," felt like a betrayal. He said it so easily, like it wasn't our world that had fallen apart, like moving forward was some moral obligation instead of a choice. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the sound of his footsteps upstairs, the faint hum of music coming from his room. Every now and then he'd laugh quietly, probably at something Lena said over the phone. It wasn't fair. I had lost a husband. I couldn't lose a son too. When Saturday came, I found excuses to keep busy. Baked muffins. Rearranged the flowers in the hallway. Changed the sheets in the guest room twice. Ethan thought I was nervous about having company, but the truth was I wanted her to see, wanted her to know that she didn't belong here. When Lena arrived, she was exactly what I expected. Young, soft-voiced, polite in the way people are when they're trying too hard to impress. She brought wine, complimented the house, called me Mrs. Whitmore even after I told her to call me Claire. She sat beside Ethan on the couch, their knees touching. I noticed everything. The way he leaned in when she spoke, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. It was a look he used to reserve for me, for our shared jokes, our quiet dinners. Now it was hers. I smiled and offered more pie. "You've raised a wonderful man," Lena said sweetly. "I know," I replied. "I've worked very hard at it." There was a flicker in her expression. Confusion, maybe discomfort. I didn't care. Later that night, when they went out for a walk, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the 2 empty wine glasses they'd left behind. The sight made my chest ache with something dark and unnameable. When they returned, laughing softly in the hallway, I pretended to be asleep on the couch. Ethan covered me with a blanket, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Good night, Mom." I waited until I heard their footsteps fade before I opened my eyes. The next morning I made breakfast for 3, though none of us spoke much. Lena tried, bless her, but her voice was just background noise to me. I watched Ethan pour her coffee, his hand brushing hers lightly, and felt a shiver of anger crawl up my spine. After she left, I went into his room. The air still smelled like her perfume, sweet, floral, invasive. I opened the window, letting the cold air rush in, and sat on the edge of his bed. There was a strand of her hair on his pillow, long and blonde. I picked it up and rolled it between my fingers before dropping it into the trash. She was trying to steal him from me. I could feel it. That night I cooked his favorite meal again. Roast chicken. Creamy mashed potatoes. The kind of dinner that reminded him of home, of me. He smiled when he saw it. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." "It's no trouble," I said. "You're my son. It's what I live for." He looked at me, a strange mixture of affection and unease in his eyes. "You know, sometimes I worry about you, Mom." "There's nothing to worry about. I mean it. You've been different lately." "I don't know, just tense." I laughed softly. "Of course I'm tense. I lost your father." "I know. But it feels like you're afraid of losing me too." Froze. The words hung in the air, heavy and uninvited. "Why would I be afraid of that?" I asked quietly. He sighed. "Because one day I'll move out again. And you'll have to let me." Let him go. Those words burned. He reached over and touched my hand, squeezing it gently. "You'll be okay," he said. I smiled through tears I couldn't control. "Don't ever say that. Don't ever promise me I'll be okay without you." The following days were colder. The silence returned, thicker than before. He spent more time in his room, working on his laptop, talking less at dinner. Sometimes I'd stand outside his door just to hear him moving, proof that he was still there, still mine. I started keeping his laundry folded perfectly. His sheets freshly pressed. It gave me comfort, a sense of control. But every time I saw his phone light up with her name, my stomach turned. One evening, he left his phone on the counter while he went to take a shower. The screen flashed with a new message. "Lena, I miss you. When can I see you again?" Without thinking, I picked it up. My hands trembled as I typed. "Ethan, I think we should take a break. Mom needs me right now." Then I deleted the message thread. When he came back, humming and wrapped in a towel, I was already setting the table. My heart pounded, but my smile didn't waver. "Dinner's ready," I said. He smiled, oblivious. That night he seemed quieter. He checked his phone once, frowned slightly, then tucked it away. I told myself I had done the right thing. I was protecting him, from distractions, from heartbreak, from the pull of a world that didn't need him like I did. It wasn't wrong. It was love. A week passed before Lena showed up again, uninvited, standing at the door with tears in her eyes. "Is Ethan here?" she asked, voice trembling. "He's out," I lied. She looked uncertain. "He hasn't answered my calls. Or my texts." I smiled kindly, the way I used to when scolding him as a child. "He's been busy helping me. We've both been through a lot." "I understand," she said softly, though I could see confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Just tell him I stopped by." "Of course," I said, closing the door before she could say another word. I stood there for a long time, hand on the doorknob, listening to the sound of her car pulling away. When Ethan came home later, I didn't mention it. I made him tea instead, and he thanked me, and we sat together in comfortable silence as the snow began to fall outside. Felt like peace. Felt like safety. Felt like us. But peace never lasts, does it? That night, I woke to the sound of him talking downstairs. His voice was low, urgent. I crept to the hallway and listened. "Lena, I don't know what's going on," he said into the phone. "I never sent that text." My blood ran cold. "I swear I didn't. Maybe my phone glitched or something." "Yeah, I miss you too." He sighed, frustrated but gentle. "I'll talk to Mom tomorrow. She's been fragile. I just need to make sure she's okay first." Fragile. The word cut deep. When he hung up, I slipped quietly back to my room, lying awake until dawn. Fragile. As if I were some cracked porcelain thing to be handled carefully but never truly seen. He didn't understand. He couldn't. Everything I did, every lie, every moment, I did out of love. Out of fear of losing the only person who still made my life worth living. The next morning, he found me in the kitchen, already cooking breakfast. "Mom," he began, hesitant, "we need to talk." "About Lena?" I asked before he could continue. He blinked, surprised. "You knew. I'm your mother, Ethan. I know everything about you." He sighed. "She said she came by last week, but you told her I wasn't home." "She caught me off guard," I said evenly. "I didn't think it was a good time." He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he always did when he was frustrated but trying to stay polite. "Mom, you can't do that. You can't keep treating me like I'm still 12. You're my son," I said. "That's never going to change." "I know," he said softly, "but you have to let me have my own life." "I am your life." The words escaped before I could stop them. His eyes widened. The silence that followed was unbearable. I looked away, tears burning my eyes. "I just mean, I've spent so long taking care of you. I don't know who I am without that." He reached out, hesitant but kind. "You're my mom. That's who you are. But you don't have to lose yourself because of me." I nodded, pretending to understand. But inside I was certain he was wrong. Because if he ever walked away for good, if he ever truly left, there'd be nothing of me left to save. The morning after our argument, the house felt different. Colder somehow. The air between us no longer hummed with the comfortable silence we used to share. Every sound felt amplified. The scrape of his chair against the floor, the rattle of spoons in the sink, the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. Ethan didn't look at me much that day. When he did, his eyes carried a new distance, as though he were trying to see me from somewhere else, some safer place. He left the house that afternoon without saying where he was going. I didn't ask. I told myself that giving him space was an act of love, that by staying silent, I was learning to be the kind of mother he needed. But when the front door closed, the silence it left behind felt like abandonment. He was gone for hours. I walked through every room in the house, touching his things. His books, his jacket, the mug he always used for coffee, as though by doing so I could summon him back. When he finally returned that evening, the faint scent of perfume clung to his clothes. Not mine. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Out," he said. "With Lena." He hesitated. That pause again. That guilty little silence that told me more than words ever could. "Yes," he said finally. "I needed to apologize. We talked. I wanted to ask what they talked about." I wanted to know everything, every word, every look, every promise. But I only nodded, pretending to understand. "That's good," I said softly. "I'm glad you did." He smiled a little, relieved. "Thanks, Mom." But as he walked away, I caught a glimpse of something in him I hadn't seen before, something pulling him away from me, piece by piece. That night I dreamt of water. I was standing on a dock, calling out his name, but the fog swallowed my voice. I could hear him laughing somewhere far off, a woman's laughter echoing with his, blending together until I couldn't tell one from the other. When I woke, the pillow was damp beneath my cheek. The following days were filled with small betrayals. He started spending less time at home, coffee dates, walks in the park, movie nights. He'd leave wearing his father's old jacket, the one I'd kept hanging in the hall closet for years. I told him it didn't fit right, but he wore it anyway. Every time he came home late, I'd sit by the window, pretending to read. The sound of his car in the driveway always made my heart race. Half relief, half resentment. "Did you have fun?" I'd ask, careful to keep my tone light. "Yeah," he'd say, smiling. "Lena's great." Always Lena. Her name had become a ghost that haunted every conversation. He showed me a photo once. The two of them standing by a lake, sunlight bouncing off the water. She was holding his arm, her head tilted toward him. He looked happy. Too happy. "She's lovely," I said, my voice too tight. He beamed. "She really is." After he left the room, I stared at the picture on his phone until the screen went black. My reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, lips pressed thin, the faint outline of a woman who didn't belong in that world anymore. Started snowing again that week. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. One evening I found a letter in the mail, a wedding invitation. Not Ethan's, of course, but from one of his college friends. The card was cream-colored with gold lettering. I ran my fingers over it absently, imagining the day when a card like that might arrive for him. And I realized I wasn't ready. The idea of another woman standing beside him in white, touching him, claiming him, building a life that didn't include me, filled me with a quiet terror I couldn't name. People talk about letting go as though it's an act of kindness, but for me it felt like dying twice. I tried to distract myself. I started redecorating. A new coat of paint in the living room, fresh curtains, a vase of lilies by the window. Ethan noticed. "You've been busy," he said one afternoon, setting his keys on the counter. "It helps," I told him. "Gives me something to do while you're out." He hesitated before replying. "You could come out with us sometime, you know. Lena doesn't mind." The offer felt like pity, like a bone thrown to a starving dog. "Oh no," I said, smiling tightly. "You two need your time together." He nodded a little too quickly. After he left that evening, I sat in his room for a long time, staring at the unmade bed, the worn sneakers by the door, the open laptop on his desk. A faint message notification blinked on the screen. "Lena, miss you already." The words burned into my mind. I closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room. "You'll miss me someday." When the winter thawed into spring, he announced he'd be going back to school. We were in the kitchen. I was slicing apples when he said it. His tone casual, as though he were discussing the weather. "I got an offer to finish my last semester early," he said. "If I leave next week, I'll be back by summer." The knife slipped in my hand, cutting through the skin of my finger. I barely felt it. "Next week," I repeated. He nodded. "It's short notice, I know. But it's time." The word echoed in my mind, like the final toll of a bell. "I thought we had more of it," I said quietly. He sighed. "You'll be fine, Mom. You've made so much progress. You're painting again, gardening." "I did those things because of you," I interrupted. "Because you were here." He reached for my hand. I pulled it back before he could touch me. He frowned, then softened his voice. "I'll call you every day." "I don't want calls," I whispered. "I want you here." He didn't answer. That night, I found myself standing at his door again. The faint glow of his bedside lamp painted his sleeping face in soft gold. He looked so peaceful, so far away. I wanted to wake him, to tell him he couldn't go, that I couldn't survive another goodbye. Instead, I whispered, "I love you so much, Ethan." Too much. The words hung in the air, trembling between guilt and truth. When I left his room, I pressed my forehead against the door, whispering a prayer I didn't fully believe in anymore. "Don't take him from me," I said. "Not him." He packed his bags that weekend. I hovered, folding his shirts, slipping small things into his suitcase. The mug he loved, the old family photo from the beach, a scarf I'd knitted. Little anchors, I told myself, to remind him where he belonged. When the taxi arrived, I stood on the porch as he loaded his bags into the trunk. "I'll call when I get there," he said. "I know." He hugged me tight, the way he used to when he was little. His chin resting on my shoulder, his arms around me. For a moment, I almost believed he didn't want to leave either. "I'll miss you, Mom," he said. I held him a second too long. "You'll come back soon." "Of course," he said, smiling. But I knew that smile. It was the kind people use when they don't want to break your heart. As the taxi disappeared down the road, I stood there until the sound of the engine faded completely. The house behind me felt impossibly large. The silence, unbearable. For the first few weeks, he called every day. Morning check-ins, late-night updates. But then the calls became shorter, less frequent. He was busy, he said. Projects, friends, Lena. Her name was back on his tongue, lighter now, freer. Each time he mentioned her, I forced a smile. But afterward, I'd sit alone in the kitchen, tracing the rim of my coffee cup with shaking fingers, feeling the emptiness expand. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking aloud, to the air, to him, to the ghost of my husband. "I just want him home," I'd whisper. "Is that so wrong?" One afternoon the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Lena stood there, holding a small box. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore," she said gently. "Ethan asked me to drop this off. He said he forgot it when he left." I stared at her for a long moment before taking the box. "He didn't tell me you'd be coming." She smiled faintly. I was in the area. There was something different about her. A new confidence, maybe. Or perhaps I was just noticing it for the first time. "I know this must be hard," she said quietly. "But he loves you, you know. He talks about you all the time." I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm sure he does." She hesitated before leaving. "He's doing really well, Mrs. Whitmore. You'd be proud of him." Proud. That word sat heavy in my chest, like guilt wrapped in kindness. When she was gone, I opened the box. Inside were old family photos and a small snow globe, one Ethan used to keep on his nightstand. It had a tiny house inside, surrounded by falling snow. I shook it once, watching the flakes swirl and settle. A house of two, frozen in glass. That night, I sat in his empty room, clutching the snow globe to my chest. The phone rang once, then again. I didn't answer. I couldn't bear to hear his voice sound happy somewhere else. So I sat there, rocking slightly, whispering into the stillness. "He'll come back. He has to. No one loves him like I do." The snow inside the globe began to settle again, still and perfect, as the night folded around me. And for the first time I wondered if love could ever be too much, or if it simply becomes something else when you refuse to let it go. It started with silence. Not the ordinary kind that lives between two people, but the sort that carries weight like a judgment. Ethan had grown quiet around me, and I could tell that every word he didn't say had been carefully chosen. He didn't linger in the kitchen anymore while I cooked. He didn't ask me to taste the sauce before he left for work. He didn't sit at the table with his laptop and pretend to be reading emails just to keep me company. He had learned to leave the house early, before I came downstairs, and return late when I'd already gone to bed. Or pretended to. First I thought it was work. Had to be work. People get busier, don't they? Sons grow into men, mothers must learn to step back. I told myself these things the way I once told Ethan fairy tales before bed. Softly, repeatedly, until they sounded like truth. But one morning, I saw the truth in its cruelest form. A pink coffee mug sat in the sink. Not mine, not his. A mug with cursive letters that read, "Good morning, beautiful." I stared at it for a long time, waiting for it to disappear, for it to turn back into something innocent. A mistake, a leftover from a guest. But it didn't. It stood there, mocking me with its softness. I picked it up and held it so tightly that my knuckles turned white. A woman had been here. A woman had drunk from that cup. A woman had been in my kitchen, where I made his first birthday cake, where I nursed him through fevers, where I whispered to his tiny ears that I'd never let the world hurt him. Now someone else had entered this space. Her scent lingering like trespass. That night I asked him, "Who's she?" He froze, halfway through hanging his jacket. "Who's who?" "The woman who owns that pink mug." He hesitated. That hesitation alone broke something in me. "Lena," he said finally. "She stayed over. We had an early meeting, so it made sense." "Stayed over," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You mean she slept here?" He sighed. "Mom, please don't make this into something." "Into what?" I interrupted sharply. "Into the truth. Because that's what it sounds like to me." He stepped back as if I had struck him. "I'm 30, Mom. I'm not a child. You can't keep doing this." The sound of this hit me harder than anything else. Doing this. Like love was a crime. Like caring was something I should apologize for. "You're my son," I whispered. "My only son. I just want what's best for you. And maybe what's best for me," he said, voice tightening, "is a life that doesn't orbit around you." The silence afterward was colder than the words. He left for Lena's that night. He didn't even take the mug with him. I began to avoid mirrors after that. Every time I looked into one, I saw her reflection behind mine. Younger, freer, untouched by grief. She was taking everything I had built. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear I swallowed after my husband died. She was swallowing them too, turning them into her own happiness. I started to see her everywhere. The supermarket. Park. In the soft laughter of women passing by. My mind began playing tricks. I heard Ethan's laughter in the hallway when the house was empty. I caught myself setting the table for two, only to remember he hadn't called in days. I began keeping his old shirts folded neatly on his bed, sprayed lightly with his cologne. It made the room smell like memory, like presence. I called him every morning, then every night, then both. First he answered, then he didn't. When I tried Lena's number, it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message, but I rehearsed what I would have said. "You don't know what you're doing. He's mine. You can't have him." One day, while sorting laundry, I found a photograph wedged inside one of Ethan's drawers. A picture of him and Lena by a lake, her hand resting on his chest. He looked happy. Not the polite smile he gave me after dinner. Genuinely happy. I felt something rise in my throat. Envy, grief, something darker. I tore the picture in half. Then in quarters. Then again and again until her face disappeared entirely. The pieces fluttered into the trash like autumn leaves. That night, I slept in his bed for the first time since he moved out. The sheets still smelled faintly of him, though I knew the scent was fading. The next week, Ethan came to visit. "Mom," he said softly, standing at the doorway. "We need to talk." His voice carried a careful tone, the way a person speaks to a fragile animal. I wanted to hate that tone, but it made me want to cry instead. "About Lena?" I asked, sitting stiffly on the couch. He nodded. "We're getting married." It felt like all the air left the room. My heartbeat filled the silence. "Married?" He sat across from me. "I wanted you to hear it from me. She's good for me, Mom. I'm happy with her." I looked at him for a long time. At the man who used to cling to my skirt when thunder frightened him, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. He spoke like a stranger now. "I see," I said, trying to smile. My lips trembled. "And where will you live?" He hesitated. "We found a place outside the city." Outside the city. Away from me. I wanted to say you can't. I wanted to scream. But instead I nodded, too numb to speak. My throat burned as though my words had turned to smoke. He reached for my hand. "You'll always be my mother." Pulled away. "Then why does it feel like I'm being buried alive?" After he left, I sat in his room again. The bed was made perfectly, almost too perfectly. I could still see the faint outline where I had slept. My reflection in the mirror looked like someone else entirely. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw, hair streaked with grief. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cold, so cold. And for the first time, I whispered something I didn't fully understand. "I love my son so much, and I must get married to him. Not in the way the world would damn me for, but in the way only a desperate, lonely heart could mean, to keep him, to never lose him again." The words sounded like madness, yet they were the only thing that made sense. The next morning, I tore down the photograph of him and Lena that he'd hung in the hallway. I replaced it with an old one, of him as a child, smiling, his hand clutched around mine. That was the last image that felt like home. The day he told me the wedding date, I smiled. It was the only thing I could do. "June 14th, Ethan said. His voice soft but firm, like he'd rehearsed it. "It's going to be small, intimate. Just family and close friends." I nodded, even though my throat tightened around the word family. I wondered if he even realized what he was saying. He went on about the flowers, the menu, the lake view at the venue. Every word stabbing deeper, as though he was building a new life with bricks made from the ruins of mine. And through it all, Lena's name wove through the air like perfume I couldn't stand but couldn't escape. "She wants you there," he said at last. "It would mean a lot to both of us." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say I'd wear blue, the color he always said looked soft on me, and that I'd bring the necklace his father gave me when Ethan was born. Something borrowed, something blessed. But the words wouldn't come. Because how do you attend a wedding that feels like your own funeral? The weeks leading up to it were worse than I expected. The invitations arrived in the mail. Elegant white envelopes embossed with gold. I tore mine open and stared at the lettering. "Ethan James Rowe and Lena Grace Whitmore invite you to share in the joy of their union." Union. The word hit me like a stone. For days I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. The house felt smaller, darker. The silence was heavier. I walked through rooms that still remembered him. The marks on the wall where we'd measured his height. The faint scuff on the hallway floor from when he'd ridden his toy car too fast. Memories hung like ghosts, whispering of the boy who once called me Mama. Sometimes I caught myself setting 2 plates on the table again. Old habits die harder than love. 2 nights before the wedding, Ethan stopped by with Lena. They stood at the doorway like a photograph of everything I wasn't. She looked lovely, simple dress, kind eyes, hair tied back. I wanted to hate her, but there was something about her gentleness that made my anger feel foolish, almost childish. "Hi, Mrs. Rowe," she said softly. "It's so good to see you." Mrs. Rowe. Not Laura. She still saw me through Ethan's last name, the one I'd kept like armor after his father died. I forced a smile. "You too, Lena. Come in." They sat together on the couch, hands intertwined. I served them tea, the same blend Ethan liked when he was sick as a boy. Lena complimented it, said it tasted like home. That word, home, lodged in my chest. "So," I began, sitting across from them, "how are the preparations going?" Lena smiled, her eyes darting toward Ethan. "Almost done. We just finished picking the music." "Oh," I tried to sound casual. "And what song will you walk to?" She looked at Ethan, smiling. "Can't help falling in love. His father used to sing it to him, didn't he?" My hands froze around the teacup. I'd told Ethan that story, about his father humming that song in the hospital room the night he was born. He must have shared it with her. Something sacred, now diluted, passed into new hands. "That's lovely," I whispered. The rest of the evening blurred. I nodded when I had to, smiled when expected, but all I could hear was the echo of that song. By the time they left, I was shaking. When the door closed, I collapsed against it and wept silently. I didn't know if I was crying for him or for myself. Maybe both. The day of the wedding dawned bright, too bright. The kind of sunlight that mocks your pain. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection. My dress, pale gray, hung loose on me now. I had lost weight, but grief has a way of consuming more than the body. It eats through the spirit too. On the vanity table lay the invitation. I ran my fingers over the names again, tracing the ink until it smudged slightly. My heart whispered, go. My pride hissed, stay. I didn't know which voice was mine anymore. I walked to Ethan's room one last time. Everything was still, the bed neatly made, the air faintly tinged with his cologne. I sat on the edge and closed my eyes. Do you remember, I whispered into the quiet, how you used to promise you'd never leave me? My voice cracked. You said we'd always be together. Always. I waited for an answer that would never come. At noon, the church bells rang in the distance. I imagined the scene. Lena in white, Ethan in a dark suit, the sunlight spilling through stained glass. People smiling. Applause. Kiss. I could almost hear it, the applause, the music, the laughter. The same song his father sang once playing for her now. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it wouldn't stop. Instead of going to the church, I went to the lake. The same one where Ethan had learned to skip stones with his father when he was 10. The water was still, except for the occasional ripple, a soft heartbeat of nature. I sat by the shore, clutching a framed photo of Ethan as a boy, gap-toothed, smiling, hair sticking up like sunlight. I hope she loves you, I whispered. I hope she knows how lucky she is. My voice trembled. And I hope she never forgets who made you who you are. I stayed there until the bells stopped ringing, until the sky began to blush with evening. When I returned home, the house greeted me with a silence that felt alive. I walked to the living room and stopped at the mirror on the wall. My reflection looked like a stranger, eyes hollow, lips trembling, a ghost of a woman who had once known love too deeply. I touched the glass again. You did your best, I told the reflection. You kept him safe. You raised him alone. You were everything. The reflection didn't answer, of course. But for a moment I thought I saw movement, not mine but his. A small boy's silhouette behind me, smiling. Ethan, I whispered. There was no one there. Only the wind. That night I set the table for two again. Out of habit, out of hope, I don't know. The meal went cold, untouched. I poured wine into 2 glasses, raised mine, and said quietly, to my son, the man who used to be my boy. Tears spilled into the wine, turning it saltier than I remembered. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear the faint echo of Can't Help Falling in Love. It no longer sounded like a wedding song. It sounded like a lullaby for something lost. June 28th. It's been 2 weeks since the wedding. The house hasn't changed, but everything inside it feels rearranged, as if the furniture is pretending to be what it once was. I walk through each room and whisper your name sometimes, Ethan. Not loudly, not like before. Just enough for it to hang in the air for a moment, before silence swallows it whole. The days are long now. I wake before the sun rises, make breakfast for 2, and then remember. Always remember. I used to think forgetting was the cruelest thing a mind could do. Now I see that remembering can be worse. Your father used to say grief was a slow teacher. Cruel, patient, and thorough. He was right. July 3rd. I found your wedding photo online today. You looked so handsome in that dark suit. You've grown into your father's jawline, though you smile like me. Shy but full of warmth. Lena looked beautiful. It hurt to write that, but it's true. There's something about the way she looked at you, like she saw the whole of you, even the parts one built. I printed the photo and placed it beside your baby picture on the mantel. I wanted them to live side by side, who you were and who you became. Sometimes I still can't believe you're gone from this house. I keep expecting your footsteps in the hallway, your laughter breaking through the quiet. But all that's left is the ticking of the clock. Steady, unforgiving, counts down to nothing in particular. July 10th. I went to the lake again today. The water was calm, too calm. A few ducks floated near the reeds, unbothered by the world. I envied them, their simple existence, their unknowing peace. I sat by the edge and read one of your old school essays. The one titled, My Hero. You wrote it when you were 9. You said your hero was me. You said I made sadness look like strength. I used to think that meant I'd done something right. Now I wonder if it only meant I hid too well. You told me once that you wanted to make me proud. You have, Ethan. You always have. Even now, even far away, you are the pulse that keeps me tethered to this world. And yet, the tether feels thin. July 16th. I dreamed of you last night. You were small again, 5 maybe, wearing your blue raincoat, the one you insisted on even when the sun was shining. We were walking down the road, hand in hand. You were humming the same tune your father sang in the hospital that day. When I looked down, you looked up at me and said, "You can let go now, Mommy." But I didn't want to. Even in the dream I couldn't. I woke up with my hand stretched into empty air. It's strange how dreams can feel heavier than memories. July 20th. Lena called today. Her voice was gentle, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She said you'd been asking about me, that you worried I wasn't answering your messages. I told her I was fine, that I'd just been tired. She asked if she could visit. I told her maybe another time. After I hung up, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried. Not because I hated her, but because she cared. And I didn't know what to do with that. For years, I thought love was something you could guard, something you could hold tight enough to keep forever. Now I see it's not something you keep. It's something you give away and hope it remembers you kindly. July 25th. I started cleaning the attic today. Dust and time make strange companions. I found your baby blanket. Faded blue, frayed at the edges. I pressed it to my face, inhaled what was left of you in it. There was also a box of your father's things. His watch, some letters, and an old cassette player. Press play. The tape crackled, and then his voice filled the room. "Laura," he said, "if you're hearing this, it means you're still standing. And that's enough." I hadn't realized until that moment that I'd been holding my breath for years. He was right. I am still standing. Barely, maybe. But standing. August 2nd. I dreamed of the wedding again. But this time I wasn't outside the church. I was inside. You were walking down the aisle, and everyone stood. When you reached the altar, you turned and held out your hand to me. Not to Lena. Me. You smiled and said, "You can sit now, Mom. You've done enough." And then I woke up, crying into the pillow. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or jealousy. It was peace. A deep, aching peace that comes when something inside finally stops struggling. August 5th. I went to bed early tonight. The house feels softer, somehow quieter, kinder. There's a letter on the table for you. I've written and rewritten it a dozen times, never sure what to say. Maybe you'll find it one day. Maybe you won't. But if you do, I want you to know this. Ethan. You were my beginning and my middle. I thought you'd have to be my ending too, but I see now that life doesn't belong to the ones who give it. It belongs to those who live it. You have given me everything I ever wanted. Love, laughter, purpose. Even your distance has taught me something valuable. That love is not ownership. It's presence, even in absence. I will always be with you, not as a chain, but as a shadow that follows you kindly, quietly. Love her. Be happy. I am finally letting go. August 6th. Morning light spilled through the window today, and for the first time I didn't turn away from it. The world outside is still alive. Children laughing, cars passing, birds bickering over crumbs. It's strange to realize that life keeps moving even when your own feels paused. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not meant to wait for us. I've done my part. And now, I think it's time to rest. The journal ends there. The rest of the pages are blank, except for the faint impression of her handwriting pressed into the paper, as though the words continued somewhere beyond ink, beyond sound. When Ethan found the journal months later, he read it sitting by the lake. Lena stood beside him, silent, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The sun dipped low behind them, painting the water gold. And in that stillness, with the wind moving softly through the reeds, Ethan swore he heard his mother's voice. Not in grief, not in pain, but in peace. You can let go now, my boy. Subscribe for the next life story.